Okay, so welcome back to the first breakout session for today. We start this afternoon with a parallel session in each of the ballrooms. This hall, Ballroom 2, is hosting the Workforce 2030 track, while Ballroom 1 has Next in Digital track and Ballroom 3 has the Age of Entrepreneurs track. The first session here, we have a stellar panel consisting of leaders from the industry who will give us their perspective on creating the workforces of tomorrow. Without further ado, I'm going to invite on stage Nitin, Seth, CEO, Incedo Inc., to introduce the panel. He is responsible for the definition and execution of Incedo's strategy, creating and implementing on the company's vision and mission, and shaping a unique and effective organizational culture. And now, he's also into meditation. He has a passion for sports. Squash is his preferred sport, and he loves to travel, and his heart is where the hills are. So Nitin, the stage is all yours. Over to you and to introduce the panelists. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I've been at NTLF for many, many years, but I think this is the most unique panel discussion format. So very interested. So let me, without further ado, welcome my co-panelist, Romi Malhotra. Romi needs no introduction, one of the real industry veterans, industry builders. He's now the managing director for DXC Technologies, but is a storied leader of our industry. Genpact, Dell, he has seen it all. Romi, welcome.
Thank you.
Big round of applause. I know this is after lunch, but we can have some energy. Pallavi Tyagi. Pallavi is the Chief Human Resource Officer for Capgemini, a really large multinational player which has big presence in India. Pallavi, please welcome. So Pallavi is joining Capgemini after spending more than 15 years in DuPont. So Pallavi, your range of experiences from old world to the bright new world of IT, I think will be very interesting.
Yeah, all new worlds, trust me.
Oh, okay. And finally, Peter Kokkinos, our friend from Australia. So Peter heads the enterprise business for Udemy, very exciting startup in the learning space. But Peter is no newcomer to this space. He has spent 20 years in this space, not all with Udemy, because Udemy is just a few years old. But he's real veteran in this space, and really a privilege, Peter, to have you as a part of this panel.
Thanks for the 20 years. It's actually 25 now, so I keep trying to
you look so young,
Yeah,
Peter,
that's what it is. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So look, this is after lunch, so we should get some energy levels going. So I'll start with a couple of rapid-fire questions, okay? So, for how many people here, learning is a very important objective? Stand up, please. Stand up, stand up, stand up. So we can also stand up. Come on, guys.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
right.
Yeah, clap 3 times. 3 claps, yeah, come on. Yeah. You can sit down. Yeah. So we've established that learning is a very important objective. For how many people here, learning is a very big challenge? Everybody figured out? Learning, yeah? For whom it's a challenge, please stand up. Yeah. Again, 3 claps. See, but I'm very enthused, very encouraged. Only 30% stood up. So this means like 70% have figured out that learning, because when I said learning is important, 100% stood up. But when I asked that learning is a challenge, only 30% stood up. So I think we have a very evolved, been there panel, because you know the answers, because we were discussing within the panel, and I think we had a lot of questions. So I think
We'll get to learn.
we'll get to learn.
Yeah. Sure.
So let me kick off the discussion. So look, the theme for this NTLF is Tech in the 20s, and I think over the last day and a half, there's been a lot of discussion about the need for learning. So I will not overstress that. I think we know that this is a very important very important topic. I would like to focus this discussion on more the how-to. Yeah. So why this is important and all of that, I think is that is that we well know. But the question is that how do we now break down this problem? And what are some actions that we can take and learn from practitioners here? And we have some it's an outstanding panel. See, the way I would frame the discussion, and as we are, my colleagues on the panel, I think they have shared that perspective that it's the learning challenge, learning to reinvent tomorrow, is a multi-headed challenge. It's a multi-headed challenge. It's not like a singular challenge. There is the challenge. There is the challenge, of course, of building new skills, and that has been talked about. AI, cloud, massive movement on that. Data science, IoT. There are a lot of new skills where the demand is, and how do you very rapidly build those new skills to capture the demand. But equally, that's not the entirety of the business. And there is still a lot that happens around the legacy skills. And we have people, thousands, hundreds and thousands of people in our organizations who are doing that legacy work. What happens to them? How do you upgrade their skills? Retraining, reskilling. And it's not just about retraining, reskilling. It's about lifelong learning. So how do you think about them? So that's one way of thinking about the multi-headed challenge, that there are new skills and there are more legacy skills. When you look at your organization, then also you have a multi-headed challenge. You have the millennials, and how do you engage them? And what are their expectations, their learning styles, and how do you engage with them? And equally, you have more people who are not the millennials, who have been doing something for 10, 15, 20 years. How do you think about that? And then finally, it is not just about things. It's not just about a set of tactical set of things. At least my view, and it may not be a popular view for L&D professionals in the room. By the way, how many L&D professionals here? Show of hands. I'll not ask you to get up. How many L&D professionals? Very good. Okay. So, my view, and it may be not a very nice way of framing it, is that learning is too important to be left just to the L&D function. Learning is just too important a thing. So how do you build a learning culture? It gets down to the design of our organization, the DNA of the organization. So there are 4 or 5 big themes that we want to touch on in this discussion over the next 40-45 minutes. We'll try to get to some specifics, try to get to some how-tos. But to just kick things, get the things going, discussion going, I'm going to ask each of my panelists a broad question to start with. And the question is, the topic is about reinventing for tomorrow. So what are 1 or 2 biggest changes that you see in your business going forward? Just 1 or 2, not a long list, 1 or 2. And therefore, what are your top 2 or 3 learning objectives? Okay? So 2 minutes, each of my panelists here. Who wants to start? Romi, natural leadership.
Well, thanks, but let me start with a small preamble here. And this is a small story because last week, a friend of mine retired from a company where he'd worked for 40 years and 6 months. And another classmate of his is going to retire next week from the very same company. Good friends of mine. But that's not the more interesting story. The interesting story is both their fathers worked in the very same company that they were for a similar duration of time, and that was their only job as well. So I was thinking about this, and I talked about this with my daughter. And she kind of dismissed it by saying, yeah, but that is old economy. And that got me thinking until I realized that the truth is, most of us in this room today here are from the so-called IT industry. And I think IT industry is today an old economy company from this perspective. There are enough people within you look at the pure plays in India, where there's the TCS, Infosys, Wipros of the world, or you look at the IBMs, the Accentures and the DXCs and the HPs of the world. There are enough people there for whom it was the first job, and they continue to be there. So let's not lose sight, let not the noise of what is required for one part of the business, which we call digital fashionably today, let's not take that away from a lot of work that is being done today in all these companies, which has to keep the wheels running. Whether it's infrastructure support, whether it's apps, whether it's going digital with the clouds, and all of that, yes, is happening. A lot of it is changing. A lot of it's changing faster than we can manage. But the truth is, there is a big piece of it which has to keep the business running. And learning is as important there, and connecting to where we are going tomorrow is as important there as it is for some of the new stuff that is happening that we fashionably call digital. So just with that preamble, I just want to bring home the point, one, that I think we are now an old economy company. We are a mature industry. We don't have to keep behaving like a startup all the time. And of course, there's an analytics company today where 100% of the skills are the millennials, where 100% of what they deal with is changing by the minute. And yes, that is true as well. And what we need there might be very different from what we need from a much more established setup. So to answer your question on that, Nitin, is one, I think we can't broad brush the whole learning thing to say this is what we need to do. And I was one of the people who stood up saying, I don't know how to learn as well as I did. And I think it's a question of creating that culture. And we expect people to create a pull, whereas it is as important to create a push. And just like hyper-localization is happening with AI and ML and everything else that's happening for everything else, I think learning, and I think you, Peter, will be the best person to kind of talk to us more about how do we create specific learning journeys for specific individuals depending on where they are versus where they need to go. And I think that's the future. And how do we kind of connect that in a way that it becomes a creative, not just to the organizations, but to the individuals themselves as well. So, and the last thing I'll say here is that the best way to make that happen that we have seen is gone are the days when you give people a 10-year career path. Well, 2 years here, 3 years here, 5 years here, 10 years there, and 20 years you get there. Today we talk in 12 and 18-month timeframes, saying this is what you're doing, this is where it's going, and as long as you have these skills, you can get there. And by the way, here is how you can get the skills. Whether online, offline, blended, whichever way they're delivered. But here is a way to upgrade yourself. Here is a way to kind of get skilled on that. You take the lead if you want to progress in your career. And I'm talking more of the tech guys there. So in summary, my friend who retired was a 1 into 40 equation. One skill, 40 years. I think that is going to change into either a 4 by 10, 4 skill in 10 years, or 10 by 4, 10 skills every 4 years, or maybe 1 into 40 into 1. Every year you get a new skill. So that is definitely changing for all of us. And doesn't make a difference what we do, where we are. So with that.
Thanks, Romi. Thanks much. Two very interesting themes that you have put forth. First is that we should not broad brush learning. This whole notion of that there are different things that we do as an industry. There are different type of skills and employees that we have, and we should think about that differently. And second, and somewhat a provocative comment, which is that IT is not a new industry anymore. It's an old industry. I think it's because we were joking with Pallavi before this that DuPont. So you made the shift from old industry to new industry.
Old to old.
Old to old. And they say old is gold. So I'm in the right place.
But I think the point that I think you were trying to make was that this is a pretty mature industry. So as we think about learning, we can't be like swinging from the ropes. We have to take a nuanced approach to it because these are large organizations and you can't kind of turn the oil tanker very, very suddenly. So you have to be thoughtful about it. Thank you, Romi. Pallavi, I'll come to you.
Yeah,
so
sure.
your big change that you see, 1 or 2 big things that you see changing.
So let me take this to a broader canvas. Let me take it to societal challenge, right? Inside out. And we spoke about it yesterday at dinner as well, as how do we look at taking it to the larger society for digital literacy, for providing and reducing the digital divide that we see in the society. And that's where I think as an organization, all of us can play a role in terms of learning. And we are doing that as part of a CSR activity. So we've touched 1 million lives positively. We have our employees who are very actively engaged and involved in these activities to take it forward to the larger societal advantage. We have digital literacy centers where we are looking at close to covering about 200,000 citizens in India in the next couple of years. We also have digital academies, the curriculum of which is curated by our own learning professionals, owned by our business, and business leaders also take part in carrying out those classes, and we are looking at a couple of thousand in the next couple of years. So when we look at learning, and I think what we bring as an advantage to the table as an organization is technology. So the question is not just internally, which innately comes to us for learning, and I'll talk about it in the due course of time during the panel discussion, but I'm also saying, why don't we look at inside out?
Fantastic.
And as a societal challenge, what more can we do in the learning space and help truly the citizens of India?
Fantastic. I think that's an amazing point, that the size of the challenge is so much that we can't just look at it within our organizations. We have to look outside. Because end of the day, it is about our ecosystem and what it is producing, because there is only so much that our organizations can do. And again, I think the second point that you're making is also that given the scale of some of our organizations and the use of technology, there is an opportunity of leapfrogging that learning change in the ecosystem. Fantastic. Thank you. Peter, over to you. I know you have all the answers.
I do. I'm going to give them all to you now.
So your initial comments, what are the big challenges you're seeing and big themes?
Well, you mentioned 25 years in the industry, and I have been in EdTech for that long. And I think for the 23 of the 25 years that I've been doing this, I've had to go and speak to organizations, and Udemy takes me to hundreds of companies all over the world to talk to, and I've had to convince them as to why they should be investing in their people. I mean, that's the conversation you start with. Why should you invest money? Why is training and development and learning so important? But over the last 2 years, that's completely shifted, and we're seeing organisations now coming to us saying, we need your help because this is moving too quickly for us to handle. And it's interesting, Romi, you mentioned it before about this sort of 4-to-1, 10-to-1 type of thing. That applies to everybody in the room. So everybody here will have that challenge going into the next 3 or 4 years. I read a statistic that 133 million new jobs, new roles will be created in the next 3 years. 133 million. Whatever that is, that's a huge number. Whether that applies to your business or not is another thing. But every organisation, every theme I hear, every organisation says we can't keep pace. The skill gap's getting wider. That means all of us, our skills are getting wider. And the number one issue is that although 67% of CEOs say that they don't have the skills, their organisations don't have the skills to execute against their business goals, they're not investing. They're not investing and providing L&D with the support that they need to address the issue. You touched on it before. It shouldn't just be L&D's problem. It always has been. We're starting to see a shift, but I don't think it's moving as quickly as it needs to be. And L&D really does need some help, and everybody in this room needs help because this is moving quicker than any of us have ever seen before. And it's good for Udemy because we're in the right place at the right time, I think, which is great. So you can come and see us at our stand around the corner too, if you like. But yeah, that's what we're seeing at the moment, and we can go into broader details, but that's sort of thematically what I see.
Fantastic. So what you're saying is that there is a big kind of need out there in terms of
it's unprecedented.
130 million new skills. People are talking about it, but when rubber meets the road, there is still this kind of thing about learning versus doing.
Yeah.
And there is this kind of bias towards doing versus learning. So how do you shift that fundamental mindset? Fantastic. Thank you, all of you. I think we already have some very interesting kind of thoughts on the floor here. Let's kind of dig into some details. Yeah. So it's a topic which has been which we are aware of. Peter, you framed it. The 130 million kind of new jobs. And for us in the IT industry, that's a very real thing. A lot of our growth is around cloud and AI, data science, and all of the new skills. And it's nowhere in the world is that talent fully there. So that talent has to really, the demand is there, and we have to rapidly scale up our talent to meet the demand. So some interesting experiences on how you guys are approaching that.
Sure. So we have, so HR and consultants love the 9x9 box
Right.
matrix. So we do have that 9x9 box matrix where we look at what is the business need and what are the market skill needs, right? And in that 9x9 box matrix, we plot what is required from a business availability perspective and what is available in the market.
Right.
And that actually then tells us, which is of course the topmost quadrant, is that where we need our employees to get
And if I
trained
may
on.
ask, what is there in your topmost quadrant?
Yeah, sure, I can read out some. So we have like Oracle SQL and some of these skill sets that come on the top. I think you brought the point on legacy skills as well.
Right.
While there is a lot of talk about moving to the new technology skills training, the fact is the legacy skills are here to stay as well.
Right.
So this 9x9 box matrix tells us, what are the areas we need to focus on, and not exactly a right mathematical number, but how many would you want as well to get trained. So our training focus or our learning focus is on core skilling, on reskilling, and on new age skilling. And there are different methodologies that we use for doing that. So for instance, of course, you have MOOCs. We are all aware of it. We have micro-learning labs, which are short spurts of training in a specific area, like a half-an-hour video of an expert talking on a certain area, and our employees get involved in that. So these are learning on the move. And then we have academies. We have an AI academy. We have a cloud academy where you get certified in skills more in-depth. So there are different methodologies. So you had brought in the point that we should talk about how and not just the what we need to do. And we have the requirements that are very much pretty defined for us. And that's where we focus our training and learning on.
Fantastic. So I think a couple of points that I'm taking away. One is a very systematic way of assessing your needs. And then, in terms of how to, you talked about micro-learning. And I want to get back to that point because I think that's a very important theme. And you also talked about academies. Thank you. Romi?
So we obviously do everything that Pallavi's talked about. For us, the focus is more on curation rather than creation. Because what we realize is there's enough available now. And, you just look hard enough and, including partnering with organizations like yours. And so there's enough specialized work that is being done in all of this. So it's more about curating it and then linking it
Right.
to what is required. But the way we look at it is 3 different layers, if you may. You look at leadership, and, by the way, that is, in India, I feel that is a highly neglected piece of learning that needs to happen. Just the whole leadership development piece that needs to be there. And it doesn't help that there's hardly any leadership development research happening in this country. Everything is coming in from the outside anyway. So that is one.
Right.
And then at the bottom of the pyramid, you have people who join fresh into the organization, which is pretty much driven by demand from people, companies like ours, which see demand coming in from the customers and stuff like that. And there, the way it works is, and I think we are not unique in this, every company that is in the space, you get the people in, put them on a boot camp for 3 months, train them specifically on what you want them to do, and they're ready.
Right.
And the fact remains that you could hire a metallurgist or a civil engineer or somebody else. It doesn't make a difference. You train them on what you want them to do, and they just have the basics, they pick it up, and then they grow with it as it goes. And then there is the middle layer, of course,
Right.
which is kind of bridging the two. And everything from basic people management skills to motivating the people to do what they're doing, including learning, and helping them chart their career paths. Because the truth is, millennials don't quite know exactly where they're going when they join the company, and they might So anyway, without
We should
going
discuss
there.
that more. That's a big statement.
But that's what is happening. They don't look beyond
Right.
12 months. And if at all, 12 months
Yeah.
is a long time for them.
Yeah.
So we break it into 3. And in addition to what we described, there's a lot of emphasis on figuring out also the competencies from the soft skills perspective.
Right.
Because as you deal with, in companies like ours, which are service providers, deal with customers,
Right.
the ability to talk to them on one side. On the other side, things like design thinking, quality, Six Sigma, lean,
Right.
all of that is as important sometimes as the technical skills. And being part of the overall ecosystem and not becoming specialists. Because that is the other thing. As we get into agile ways of working and doing everything, we are realizing that the broader the skills that they have, and it's not just about being a full stack developer. It's about understanding the softer side of everything from communicating and working in teams and being able to present. That becomes as relevant and important in the quality of what you produce.
Got it. So still a very structured approach. And again, I think a theme which I'm seeing from you, Romi, is around segmentation. So 3 layers, 3 different types of, within the organization. And
Not a broad brush.
Yes, not a broad brush. Yeah, fantastic. And also this theme about curation, not creation.
And the truth is, the millennials today can look at the phone, do a 15-minute
Right.
thing, and they are very comfortable with that.
Got it.
People of my generation still mentally believe training means walk into a classroom, have someone facilitate it and all that. So there is that as you've got to keep that in mind.
Right.
And that's part of the segmentation
Right.
of
Fantastic.
horses for courses. I mean, it's
Let me, Peter, ask you a specific question, which Pallavi talked about, this micro-learning, and Romi also alluded to it. That's something big that we are seeing, that more self-directed learning.
Yeah.
It's also very different learning paradigm, because traditionally the industry has been used to very, that, okay, there is classroom-based training, and you kind of drive to specific outcomes. Now, self-directed, learning sounds good. Sounds great, but there is also then the question mark about, you finally want to make people ready and deployable for, for client work. And in this whole paradigm about self-directed learning, how do you ensure that you actually get to those outcomes?
Yeah.
So talk to us about your experiences, best practices, and deploying this self-directed learning paradigm.
Yeah, I'll focus on a little bit from Udemy's perspective. So what are we doing, Udemy for Business? What are we doing to help address some of those challenges that we talked about? So there's a couple of things that when you think about individuals, one of the biggest challenges that our customers face is getting learners to engage the learning, getting them into the learning in the first place. It's the number one challenge. So a few areas that we're focusing on that we think we bring a unique view in our industry is firstly focusing on giving the people an experience that they get in their consumer lives. That's the number one thing. So if you think about it, if you're going to go to a restaurant, if you're going to go buy a piece of technology, you're going to go stay in a hotel, the first thing you do is want to see what other people have experienced. What are people saying is good? What are people saying is bad? That hasn't really been prevalent in the learning. We ask these people to go to courses and do these courses, but they don't have any context to what other people have done in those courses. How did they go about it? What was good? What was bad? So Udemy, because we're a marketplace, allows thousands and millions of people to be able to comment on these courses and share their experiences, which means that when they get in there, they're getting that experience that they wouldn't normally get. So I think we need to try and capture the way people are making decisions about investing their time in buying a product as much as investing their time in learning. So that's a really important thing, because I want to know that I can go in, I can see what someone else has experienced, avoid the good, do the good bits, avoid the bad bits, and move on with my day. So that's how we're engaging them. The second piece to this is probably more around democratizing learning a little bit. So once you've sort of shared the experiences of people around the world, millennials in particular are interested in career mobility. What's the next role for me? If I'm going to go invest my time learning, then there should be something in it for me. So we're really trying to answer those questions. What's in it for you? How do we take you from where you are today to your next job, to the next project? So the idea is that we're allowing any individual in an organisation to curate their own learning path, and you talked about this. So this is my experience as a learner. So anyone can create a learning path saying, here's how I did it. I went from this role to that role by doing these things. and they share it out there, and people
So it's
can...
the wisdom of the crowds. And,
Exactly. They can see what's going on. They can get a feel for how that individual did it. They've got some context. It's a business context. It's in their organisation, and it's a human-to-human context, rather than just dumping a bunch of courses in front of someone saying go for it. So that we're trying to build that context to everybody when they engage the learning, and it means something to them, and they can see a path into the future.
Got it. Thank you. I'm just looking at the watch. I think we are a little rushed for time. There are 3 questions I still want to ask you guys, but I'll ask them specifically. One each to the 3 of you. So Pallavi, to you about millennials. I know that you've thought quite a bit about it. That what is different about learning for millennials, and what are some things that at Capgemini you guys are doing?
So, external research data does suggest, and Peter spoke about it, it's about curated learning. It's about purpose-driven. I think millennials are a lot purpose-driven, and they associate with that very strongly. We started a cool concept in our organization called as Millennial Garage. And that's truly a physical space. It's not a garage, it is an office space. But basically, it's a place where particularly our freshers and even the laterals can join if they want to. So it's a learning space, but more importantly, it has live projects that they themselves can sign up on. So it's a win-win. So let me give you an example. If I in HR need a work done, if I have a project, so rather than giving it in my function, finding somebody who can do it, I just go to the Millennial Garage and say, I have this problem statement. Can we have someone work on this project? And there are freshers, millennials who sign up for it and work on it. So they get a fresh, innovative perspective because they don't necessarily come with a functional expertise.
And this is in addition to their day job? Or?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So what it also does is, if I have got trained on a particular skill set, which say I'm not applying on the job, but I can apply on the project that I'm signing up for. So we have that concept. Within the garage itself, we have managers who signed up as mentors to those particular projects. So it's a win-win for both sides because, those who are working on the projects are picking up new skills or applying the skills that they have already learned.
And these are mostly internal projects or also client projects?
These are a lot internal projects and client projects also, if required. We started this concept in the month of April in 2019, and the concept started from India.
Right.
We are now globally scaling it up, and in India itself, we are scaling it up to all the cities that we operate in. So this week, we just inaugurated one of the Millennial Garages in Chennai. It's caught on well. There's a lot of energy when you go out there. You see everyone working, and different projects, right? There is no commonality at times you find within the work that's being done. And that's been really appreciated by the millennials.
Fantastic. I guess what you're saying is that millennials have this desire to contribute beyond their jobs. And how do you harness that? Fantastic. Romi, to you, you have talked a lot about, look at the big picture of what we are doing, and legacy skills are still very important. I want to ask you a question around that. That, while there is still a lot of legacy work, but what is required from that is getting upgraded. Yeah. So there is still this whole notion of, upskilling and retraining kind of, your large part of your workforce. So how do you think about that, retraining, reskilling?
So I think it has to be part of your DNA. This is no longer a can-do, it's a must-do. It's no longer an option. And I think it's just a question of how do you set the culture, how do you set the pace, how do you set the expectations, how do you link it to people's recognition, growth, how do you encourage them to take it on themselves?
Right.
And I think that is the transformation that companies have to make, where it's not the L&D or someone else kind of driving it. It's every individual understanding that if he or she has to move ahead and has to stay current, there are certain things that you have to do. That comes back to 40:1.
Right.
So what am I going to do this quarter, this month, this year? What is my personal goal? And this can't be mandated.
Right.
This has to be cultural. This has to come, till I realize that I need to learn something more. And I can be guided as to what that should be, and I could be guided where I can go and learn it, where I can get the content, where I can get the experience, where I get a mentor, where I can talk to someone about it, where I can get a rating on all that is fine. But you can take the horse to the water.
Right.
In this case, the trick is how do you create that culture where people understand
Right.
that it doesn't make a difference if you become the manager or the project manager or the CEO. It doesn't make a difference who you are. It's not going to last till like you said, learning is business and business is learning.
Right, right. So thanks for bringing that point, Romi, because that makes my next question very, very seamless, because you brought the elephant in the room, which is culture. And Peter, that's my question to you. That how do you really embed and institutionalize a learning culture?
That's a tough one. But I can give you an example of a couple of our customers, one in particular that's trying to reset the expectation about people taking responsibility for their own learning. At the past, we've had to encourage people and feed people learning as opposed to them, with all of these challenges that are happening with all of us, that we're still not getting up and getting out there and developing ourselves. So one of our customers is looking at it right back down to the colleges, so the freshers that they're bringing in. They bring in 20 or 30,000 freshers a year into the organisation, which is a huge number. And as we know, most of them aren't coming in with the skills that they need to be project ready anyway. So what they've decided to do is as they hand over the offer letter in the third year, they then give them a set of courses. In this case, it's us. It's Udemy content. They have a curriculum they build out. And basically, they expect those individuals to take their time over that period, over the next 12 months, to develop themselves. They're not there to tell them what to do or when to do it, but it is your responsibility to get yourself ready, because when you come into the boot camps, we expect you to have this level of skill. So what they're trying to do now is explain to the next 30,000 freshers that are coming into the organisation that it is your responsibility to develop yourself. You've got to take those responsibilities. We'll provide you with all the resources you need to be anything you want in this organisation, but unless you do it yourself, you're not going to last very long in this in business. So that's starting. I think they're working on trying to change the culture at the lowest level, because it's been a fight everywhere else, especially the senior levels, to get senior people to develop themselves. They typically want to be fed it. So that groundswell of young, enthusiastic people coming into a business and changing their expectations is changing culture.
Very interesting. So you're saying that the point where you can have most leverage in terms of changing culture is at the source. When you're bringing
I think so.
Lots of people, young people into the organization. That's very interesting, because normally you would say that culture you start from the top, and you kind of the role modeling and the signaling from the top. But you're saying that bottom up.
We've been trying top down for years. It hasn't been working, so let's try bottom up, right?
Fantastic.
So there's just one more thing I'd add, So one of the things we've realized also is teaching is the best form of learning.
Fantastic.
So in a different way, and we haven't done it to scale yet, but a different way, what you're trying to do is someone who's on the fringe, get them to sign up to come and teach that to a bunch of people. That forces them to learn it.
Fantastic. We could talk for much longer, but I want to get to the audience very quickly. But before I do that, 10-second questions for each of you. The same question. See, all this talk is good, but finally this has to become real and personal. Yeah. So a personal question. That what for each one of you is your personal learning goal for 2020? Pallavi, personal learning goal. One thing you want to learn.
How to deal with ambiguity.
How to deal with ambiguity.
And make it real for my teams to work on.
Fantastic. Thank you. Romi, personal learning goal.
I won't say 2020 because I take my learning goals 1 month at a time. Because then they change again. So right now I'm just trying to understand, we had a lot of millennials who work with them, trying to understand them better. So anything I can get on to understand how they think, what motivates them, what drives them.
Fantastic.
And to try and see how we can kind of...
Learning about millennials. Peter, your personal learning goal.
I have a lot of conversations with technical people around AI and ML and all these kinds of things, and I can see it at a higher level, but I'd actually like to get into the detail a bit more so I understand a little bit more of the context. So I'm trying to focus on skilling myself up in those areas.
Fantastic.
Not as a practitioner, but just as a high level.
Excellent. Over to you guys. Questions? Yes, sir.
Hello. This is specific to Pallavi. My name is Sumit. I represent one of the multinationals. We work very closely to your office in Pune. My question is more specific towards a research we have done as a company where we have done an employee value proposition to understand what is it that millennials or employees want. And we have found out that a lot more of millennials in today's generation wants about career progression. And we are trying to correlate that to learning. So learning, where I heard most of you talking about, is towards development and how you run your business. Whereas I would be keen to understand from a Capgemini perspective, does that have any correlation to career progression and how you're tying up the learning to growth of people, which eventually, as an head of HR of the company, you would have retention and attrition problems to deal with?
So great question. Thank you, Sumit. And you're right. I mean, one of the key feedback that we also get from millennials, and one of the key feedback also is millennials don't want to be called millennials, but perhaps young professionals. And maybe we need to look at that as an industry to change. We also get the feedback that one of the key things millennials or young professionals are looking for career progression and career paths. And so for that, we truly have, and how do we tie it with learning? We have for every role what we call it as a learning map. So while there are many courses that are offered, so whether it's MOOCs, micro learning labs, different academies, we also have a lot of soft skill training that we do on leadership. But the fact remains that as an individual, I need to know what are some of these programs or processes that I need to go through in order to get to my next career level. And that's where we have created career maps along with learning skills that tie in to show that if and again, career can be like a T. So the T is where if you want to be a technologist, pure technologist, you have the depth. And if you have to build a breadth, you build the managerial capability. And we have those career maps laid out. We also have learning maps laid out associated with those. So they can be truly curated, as you spoke about, and very focused on an individual to say, where do I want to go next, and what do I do to get there?
Thank you.
Thank
More
you.
questions?
Hi. So my question is to anybody who can answer. So I heard a lot about skills. But today when we know that there are a lot of technologies which are getting obsolete by the day, right? By the hour or whatever. So, and we're talking about disruption. So I think there is a need for skill agnostic capabilities in people, wherein they can skill on the go by themselves. So I'm talking about competencies here.
Right.
So where are we, how are we focusing on competency development? And I will be interested to know what are the tools, or how do we, what is it that you all do in your organization to track competency development, and how do you tie it to skills, and how do you maintain a skills inventory within your organization to know who's got what skills, so that you can run internal mentorings instead of all the time, going to, because learning from experience from a mentor already in the organization has a lot more value.
Great question.
Wow, big question. That's got to be you guys.
Romi, why don't you take a shot? I answered the previous one. I'll add on then.
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, today's skills are getting outdated faster than, a couple of years back, it was very hot to be a Java developer, But the truth is that even today, we hire AS400 people. So it's not as if your skills totally get outdated. The fact remains that there are always new technologies that are coming in. And if I may take a couple of minutes to just explain what I'm saying. See, the 70s was more the mainframe era. 80s became client server, and PCs came in there, and the 90s became all about mobile, 2000 became internet. The truth is, and I'm surprised that someone in Stanford or Harvard hasn't yet come out with a name for this era, which is starting in 2020. But the truth is, this is going to be the ecosystem. This is the matrix, not like in the movie, but this is the matrix, where you've got a lot of vertical and horizontal players that are going to be doing it. Take the example of Uber. You press one button, but you realize that there are about 29 companies, multi-billion-dollar companies behind that, providing the technology to get you that cab and pay for that. And that is what is happening. So the point is not here and now only for individuals, and that is what people need to understand. That there are skills beyond that, what you might call competencies. There are skills and competencies beyond just the immediate tech stuff that is required to do something. Now, whether that's the design thinking skills, well, we are broadly understanding why are they doing what they are doing from a business perspective, not necessarily just a technology. And of course, technology is important. And once they begin to understand that, whether it's design, whether it's quality, whether it's whatever it is, you can then begin to start working your journey on that. And it comes back to the 1 in 40 that I keep saying. But what is that new skill this year that you need to have in addition to the Java that you were passing out with? So I don't know if that answers your question.
If I may add, Romi, to what you said, I love your question. It's a very deep question. See, look, technology cycles are shrinking, and therefore this whole thing about skills, whatever skill we are going to talk about is, the lifespan of it or the half-life is going to be short. And therefore, you're absolutely right, I think, where you're going, that it is about some fundamental competencies. In a very rapidly changing world, the way to win is to focus on things that are not going to change. Yeah, and I think there are 2 or 3 skills which I think are fundamental, or competencies. I think the most important thing for our industry is problem-solving skills. Because, once you build those problem-solving skills, that's very kind of, permanent. That's very, very kind of lifetime. It's also learnability. How do you learn? And it is about the interpersonal skills of how do you connect. And I think that's the next frontier for our industry. That's the next frontier for our industry, because a lot of these skills typically have been built through apprenticeship models, which are very high touch, which require time. Our industry has done a great job, even with the new skills, in terms of how do you industrialize them and how do you build them at scale. But I think some of the competencies by their nature are softer and more difficult to build. And I do think that, I won't say unsolved, but that is something which we as an industry need to, for us, the final frontier, to really kind of take, our industry to the next level of value creation. I think that's something to really, really focus on.
I think we're getting wrapped up.
So I just wanted to add, we have a system called R2D2, where we do have every individual and the skills. So we have that database with us. So.
I think we are being shut down. Thank you very much, my co-panelists. Fantastic discussion. Some big takeaways that learning is not broad brush. It's kind of, there are multiple aspects: legacy, new skills, millennials, and the more kind of, the large workforce that we have. So it's not broad brush, but I think it's also a note of positivity. For me, it was when I started this discussion and discussing with my panelists, over the last 2 weeks, for me it was about, it's very important, but there are a lot of challenges. But at least what I learned, and what I want you to take away, is that our companies are really approaching it in a very structured, systematic way. And there are a lot of good things happening. And I think that's probably the thing to take away, that there are a lot of solutions out there, and how more broadly as an industry we start adopting them. Thank you.